anybody renaming themselves, let us know in the chat if we can do it for you. We're happy to oblige, and we're going to start to mute everybody except for the golden voices of my boyfriend Jack, followed by Kirk.
Okay, good morning, good morning. Day 3 of the virtual Toronto Summer Institute. Welcome, welcome. We hope you are safe and healthy, and having had a good sleep and some nourishment, you're ready to fill your heart and your head and your hands with more great content and thinking about the future. So over to Kirk.
Well, good morning, everyone. Lovely to be here together on day 3 of the virtual Toronto Summer Institute. So at this point, day 3, we kind of know what to expect. So if you're willing to close your eyes, you shed your laps in your hands of anything that you might want to fidget with or play with, anything that might distract you. Oppositely, if you have something in your hands or your lap that brings you comfort and calm, please continue to hold on to it. We're going to breathe ourselves together into this space. So let's do one big one in together through our noses, holding at the very top, and exhaling big through our mouth. These are big overstated breaths in through our nose, holding at the top, and exhaling big through our mouth. Yeah, as we move forward with this meditation this morning, just remember that your breath is always present and always can bring you back as your mind begins to wander, which it will. That's good. It's working. But your breath is an anchor. It brings you back to the moment that you find yourself in. So I'd like you to envision in front of you a door. Reaching out towards the handle, you turn it and you walk through. As the door opens, a cool wind brushes across your face and through your hair. A path emerges, illuminated by the afternoon sun, leading down to a seashore. As you reach the water's edge, you stare into the surf. The door behind you still swaying back and forth on its hinges, squeaking ever so softly, reminding you of where you have come from. You feel the energy of the ocean, of earth, beckoning to join, an invitation in deepening your relationship to the whole. Crouched down and waxing the boards you now find at your feet in an attempt to provide the stability you'll need to head out into surf. You're struck with this epiphany. As does the moon, so am I waxing. I am waxing. I am expanding. This path leaves me no choice other than to paddle in and be open to the ebbs and flows of the tide. The door behind me now closed, a juxtaposition of my path moving forward with the letting go of my fear, being open to what will happen when I center myself and enter into a space of living my authenticity. Breathing in both directions before moving into the swell of the future. I am filled with these words. The innocent eyes of my childhood self with wonder stare through to see my present self floating here and there with hopes of truly seeing me. With a soft and gentle gaze, my future self looks in. Beyond the breaking waves awaits a future to begin. My present self sits in stillness with open mind, heart, and will. wisdom pours into my soul from this sacred space of being still. I'd like to invite us all to take one big breath in through our noses. And as we exhale big, just wiggling our toes, our feet, shaking our hands, opening our eyes, and being back together in this space.
Thank you, Kirk. I am wiggling my toes and my fingers and feeling the warmth of that sun and the surge of the surf as we begin to explore the future. And to do that, we are privileged this morning to welcome John McKnight, who has been with us from day one plus one. We started in 1984 and John started in 1985. So we have been here and we discovered each other in an interesting way. John has spent a lifetime of doing two things essentially: listening and hearing and telling stories. And his focus has been to do that around communities. And as a result of that, he co-created with Jody Kretzman ABCD, Asset-Based Community Development. Because if you listen into that term, it was to focus as we listened and heard stories, we listened for gifts and capacities. So it should not come as a great surprise that we sort of discovered each other, because while John was listening to communities, many of us have done exactly the same thing, only focused on individuals, on people, on families. So person-centered planning is deeply listening to people and hearing their stories and listening for gifts and capacities. And since people inhabit communities and communities are full of people, this is a partnership of a lifetime partnership of shared values. So as we begin to listen to John reflect about the past, the future, and what he is thinking, please feel free, and we encourage you to use the chat to be active listeners and comment on what's striking you as we go along, so we can both listen and see. And so welcome, John, once again. Welcome back, because it's almost like we've never done this without you, and we can't imagine doing it without you. So welcome, John.
Well, thanks, Jack. It's wonderful to be back at the Summer Institute. I think I first joined the Institute in 1985. I was 53 years of age, and I've been there for 35 years since then. One of the things that worries you as you get a little older, like I am, I'm 89, is that you begin to forget. You often forget in the middle of a sentence. And as though that weren't limiting enough, your eyes and ears tend to go as well. And it's harder and harder to see, for instance, in my part. So this has created a real problem for me, because in order to combat my forgetfulness, I have begun to make extensive notes when I asked to make a presentation. Didn't used to do that. It's a little line, outline. But now in the last year, my eyes have gotten so bad that I'm having trouble reading my notes. And I tell you about this so that you will understand the perhaps hesitant and readerful nature of what I'm going to try to share with you. TSI, Toronto Summer Institute, has that name now, but it had 3 different locations over the years. And the first was at McGill University. McGill, not, I think, the best of all sites, particularly for people who are concerned about folks labeled disabled, because it's on a very steep hill and old buildings. And you wondered a bit why it had been chosen, but we managed to struggle through the environment to come together. And the Institute was started by Marcia Forrest and Judith Snow, both of whom are not present in person with us today, but in spirit. And it was focused initially around, I think, mostly gathering special education teachers or people in that field. And it was organized very classroomy and very much like a teacher-learner setting. And nonetheless, there broke out some special kinds of activities. And 2 that I remember was first, a couple of us were concerned about the idea of protection. That if you listened to people who were back at that time defending institutions, they would ultimately rely on the value of protection. We are protecting people. And so we had a gathering of people, mostly from all across Canada, who met to talk about what does protection mean? And how can we think about whatever we mean by protection in ways that don't lead to people being isolated and alone and protected. And those were magnificent discussions, and I think helped all of us see that we had to have some kind of blend between some of the values of protection and at the same time an emphasis upon community. Another thing that happened there was some of you remember Pat Worth. And Pat is a person who escaped from an institution. I suppose he was 23, 24 at that time. And he was there. And he was in my class. And it was a class. And I was looking at him and thinking, we're talking about people who have the experience of being labeled. And the only person who isn't sharing what they know with us is the only person who really knows what to share. And so I invited Pat to join me in being the co-teacher. And then we began to value nothing about us without us. We moved from there to the flatland and in a rather old hotel near downtown Toronto called the Primrose. And we met on the top floor. This is a big open space. And I think the fact that we didn't have a lot of rooms and it wasn't the place where classes were, led us to begin to open up a little. We were in an open space. And we were beginning to see that there was more to talk about than a world focused on a label called disability. And we called this hotel was called the Primrose, and we called that era our time at Mount Primrose. And we began to move away from the classroom model and to begin to open up and to think more about sharing rather than teaching. And we began, I think, to have opportunities for teams of people to get together to share rather than just a focus on a teacher. And there, I think, emerged this wondrous, wondrous team of people who have kept the spirit alive. And of course, it's Jack and Linda and Kathy. And I'd want to add John O'Brien. John wasn't as old then as he is now. But as young as he was at that time, he was our elder and brought constant wisdom to our sharing and our discussions. Then we moved a little nearer to the heart of downtown at Ryerson University. And that's where we've been until this time. And there, I think we came to full flower. We had more diverse people. We had more diverse questions we were asking. We had many more shared discussions. And everyone became a teacher and a learner who participated in the Summer Institute. Now, one thing is different this year, and that is, while we were diverse and had lots of questions and answers and sharing and learning and teaching, we are also dispersed. And that dispersion has one advantage, and that is, I think, it provides a more opportunity for more people to join in this sharing than we ever were able to achieve when you had to pay and find the resources to come to Toronto at that time. So this is a gala gathering. There must be more people from more places than you could possibly imagine. So I think that what always strikes me is the importance of stories. And I just told you my stories about the Summer Institute in its 3 locations. And I know many of you were at those 3 locations, so you have your stories as well. I'd like to reflect a little on the importance of stories, particularly for those of us who are gathered here. There are stories tell us who we are. Our story is who we are as we understand it. And every story is different and also untrue, because a story about ourselves is our take on ourselves. It's how we see it. But obviously, other people would have different stories about us. One of the reasons why sharing is so essential for us to know who we are, we need not just our story, but the story of all of the people who know us. I recently have had a lot of discussions with a great his church historian named Walter Brueggemann. And we were talking about stories, and he said, stories are always somebody's take on themselves or somebody else. And he said, if you think about the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, he says, those are 4 stories that 4 people report on their experiences with Jesus. He says, but if you read their story, Mark is telling a story as a Jewish person, and that's his focus. But Luke tells the same story, at least about Jesus, and as a reformer. And John tells the story as a poet. And Mark tells the story as a strident activist. So, in a sense, we are the sum of our stories, our story about ourselves, and the stories of others who relate to and interact with us. And that's why sharing is so much more informative and wisdom producing than formal teaching and learning. Stories allow us to learn, to have wisdom, to develop empathy, to love each other, and to form communities. So what we're doing here, I think, is sharing our stories. We are, though, missionaries of a particular kind. We are missionaries for the powerful life that we can know through stories about our shared differences. There's nothing to share if we aren't different. What makes the sharing so valuable is the fact that I have now the experience of not being able to see or not being able to remember. And I'm a different me, and I have a different story. And I'm sharing it with you today. So it's our mission to celebrate difference. And we celebrate that through stories. Now, stories depend on memory. I'm very aware of that because your memory is the storehouse for your stories. And your memories are the libraries filled with the lives of people and your adventures together. David Chappelle, a wonderful philosopher who is also a comedian here in the United States, I heard him say recently, when a person dies, it's like a great library burning down. Like a great library burning down. But, he said, the books still are there in the memories of the people who knew those who passed on. And so memory is critical if we are going to have a story and to share it. TSI is a time that we set aside to tell the stories of people, our personal story, stories of the people who are around us, stories of the people who have passed on, and they are all different stories. And when we celebrate these differences, we share, we learn, and we love each other. Now, I want to finish with a few words about the book of Judith, Judith Snow. I know many of you knew Judith, and she's one of my very close and best friends. And I think we need to read her book here and to hear her story as we remember it. Judith was a great thinker, a tremendous observer, and a wonderful teacher. And she was a barrier breaker, like Joshua. She blew down the wall. And I remember her sense of wanting to be in all of the world. You can use the word inclusion, but that's pretty weak compared to I want to be in the whole world. And I was with her where I would see that happening. She she had to have an operation on her back, and she was triaged, and she waited a long time to get into the hospital for the operation. They kept extending and extending the time because other people got in line ahead of her. And we were coming to the Summer Institute, and she said, I want to go, but I can't sit up because of where my back is. I need to have a bed that moves. And she says, I can't find one here in Canada. Can you find one? So we looked around hospital supply places and found a bed that had wheels on it. You know, you raised it up. It sort of had two legs that crossed like this, and then the bed. And we went all over Toronto. 2 or 3 of her friends, we would just wheel her into a restaurant where we'd have dinner, or we'd wheel her into a gathering or a meeting. And I was so impressed by how her personal situation led her to be so creative and so motivated. I wish I was that creative. I wish I was that motivated. I remember she came to visit us at our home out in the country in Wisconsin. And I was a fisherman. And she said, I want to go fishing. And I would go fishing in a canoe, and everybody knows that a canoe is a pretty tippy thing. I said, I don't think so, Judith. It would be very good to be in that canoe. And she said, I want to do it. So we went down to one of the little lakes around here. We got the canoe, put it in the water, and with the help of 2 or 3 other people, she got in. And we went out and fished. And I had fished in that lake several times and hardly ever caught a fish. But that day I caught 6 fish. It was a miracle. Judith broke my fish boundary, right? And then another thing I remember is going down the main street there of Toronto. I'm blocking on its name, but mostly it's 2-story buildings. On the first floor stores and the second floor apartments. And Judith was in a wheelchair and we were moving down that street, and she stopped and she said, "You know, I'm frustrated." I said, "Why?" She said, "Because I'll never be able to see the second floor." And so we arranged at great pain and effort to get her to have the opportunity to see a second floor of a 2-flat building. Although she lived in an apartment where she probably lived on the 3rd or 4th floor. Judith loved elegant evenings. And every summer institute, she would say to me, "Let's have an elegant evening." And I'd find a really wonderful place to eat, usually quiet, maybe had tablecloths. And we go out just like a pair of royalty. And she loved it. She loved it. I think the last memory I have of her is she was a very spiritual person. And she said to me one time, she said, "You know, it wasn't until I was in the middle of my 30s that I learned who I was and could live in the world the way I wanted." She said, "Because in my mid-30s, I came to understand that I am not a mistake. I am exactly who God created me to be. I have gifts. My mission is to share those gifts and to receive those of others." And that was her story. And that's our story. We are the people with gifts and stories and differences. What could be better? So that's my story.
Yeah. Thank you, John. I'm reliving my version of many of those stories with Judith over the decades. So deep memories and deep appreciation. And I think the only way to follow that is to give the floor to Judith. So I'm going to ask Dave to play Judith telling us a few short stories.
I was about 6, and I was with my dad. He was helping me get dressed for the morning. And he told me a story. He told me that he had heard on the radio that doctors in California were killing children with Down syndrome because they felt those babies could never grow up to have a life that was worth living. And then he went on to tell me that when he was a boy, he grew up in Biddeford in England. And what they did then was they grew potatoes and they raised cows and sheep. And he said a person with Down syndrome was hardly even noticed in their town because people with Down syndrome, they grow potatoes and raise cows and sheep just like everybody else. But if I had been born at the time he was a boy, they would have strangled me by the time I was 3 years old because they wouldn't have known what I could do when I grew up. So I asked him, "Why are you keeping me alive?" And he said, "Maybe you'll find the answer." They said, "She will never walk. She will die before she is 4, before she is 6. She will always live with her parents. There is no point in her going to school. You will never have any friends. You will die before you are 30. Your kind belongs in chronic care. You can't travel. You will die within the next 6 months. You don't understand how it works. This isn't art." They were right. I never did learn how to walk. The situation that I have is an ongoing development of weakness in the muscles. So in my mid-20s, my hands became, I couldn't use them anymore. Friends knew a woman who was an art therapist, and they suggested that I go and paint with her. Together, I think we created a couple of hundred paintings, and it was wonderful because she was really, really good at just doing what I wanted to do, just getting on the piece of paper the picture that I wanted to paint. Unfortunately, as an art therapist, she very frequently said to me that my work was not art because I was doing it in the context of a therapy session. And I believed her. Years later, another friend, Franziska Troppensdorf, introduced me to the idea of art facilitation, which is what is behind the training we give to trackers in Laser Eagles. And then I realized that yes, vulnerability and all those other art pieces I did in the 80s were truly art. But it wasn't until then that I understood that I'm an artist. My art has created for me a space that allows me to communicate to other people that there's a whole lot more going on inside of people who otherwise don't communicate outside. And as the exhibit has emerged, I've realized that the actual exhibit itself is a place where people can be in a space that fully represents the joy of being in a world where everybody's differences are appreciated.
Please take just a minute to let whatever is resonating from the last 40 minutes to settle, to kind of catch up with you. Maybe you want to journal a little bit. Maybe you want to just take a moment of stillness to see what is it that wants to stay with you from these last few minutes. And as you come back to the whole group of us, we'd like you to participate in a tradition that's thousands of years old, a way to deal with texts that matter by noticing that the world pushes us hard to read faster and faster, to summarize things more and more briefly and get on with it. This is an opportunity for a slow reading of Judith's challenge. John McKnight asked Judith to capture her learning and to write about it. And you can read the whole of what she wrote, along with a number of her other writings, in a little ebook that John McKnight and Jack and I compiled shortly after Judith's death. And it's free, and you can download it from inclusion.com. The connection comes up just under the Summer Institute logo on the first page of inclusion.com. What we'd like to invite you to do in just a minute is we'll send you to be with two other people. So there'll be 3 of you that'll share this slow read. And what we'd like to invite you to do is to begin by centering yourself. Just take a couple breaths together. Be sure you recognize one another and know who you're sharing this experience with. And then I'd like to ask one person to read Judith's challenge, this text that you see on the screen. You also got a copy of it this morning if you've noticed in your mail. However you get it, please just center yourself and one person read the challenge aloud. And then take a moment to notice what resonates with you. And after that moment of stillness, another person take the opportunity to read the challenge aloud and journal for just a minute about whatever may want your future attention. So we're hoping that in the 3s, there'll be at least one of you that can open up the file that you got today with this on it. Let's meet in 3s and do a slow read of Judith's challenge.
Find it. I'm thinking before we turn it to Bill to put us in the groups, we could upload that file to the chat just in case it is not right in front of people.
I think I can do that.
Sarah Buffy already uploaded it.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you, Sarah.
Got it. Thank you, Sarah.
Saved us from trauma.
Yes. All right. All right, Bill, we're going to turn it to you because you've got us organized in pairs or trios.
Thanks, Linda. We are ready to go. Looks like we are evenly in groups of 3 at this point, which is wonderful. So when I press this button, everyone will be automatically moved into a small trio. Enjoy your 10-minute conversation. You will see the timer slowly count down. And when it's time to return, you will automatically be brought back here. We'll see you in 10 minutes. Enjoy your conversations.